Hey there guys, Pastor Gary here once again with Off Road, and this is the supplemental teaching we do that sort of runs parallel to our teaching on Sunday mornings, of course, which we're doing our Study 66 series, taking us through all 66 books of the Bible. Last week on Sunday morning, we covered the book of Proverbs, written by Solomon, mostly by Solomon, a couple other writers involved there. And this week we are now probing, going off-road, introducing, if you would, another Solomon-esque book, many believe, and of course this is the book of Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes literally just means the preacher. The idea is the one who proclaims, the one who sets forth is what it is. And so again, with even the book of Ecclesiastes, there are those who they don't necessarily believe that Solomon wrote it or even wrote that he just wrote part of it. I tend to believe he probably wrote the vast majority of it. So anyway, with that said, the book of Ecclesiastes is a very interesting book, and I hope as you take it up and read it, we will cover it on this coming Sunday, by the way. But I hope that as we go through it here off-road, that it will maybe whet your appetite to say, hey, I'd really like to study that book. It's, again, another practical book, but a little bit different than Proverbs. Proverbs was basically an instructional manual. Boom, 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 right? Whereas Ecclesiastes is sort of written more about the idea of life. How do we navigate through life? In fact, the word that I chose to kind of break it down was the word precept. You know, the word precept means basically a general rule that's intended to what? To give us direction in life or in our thought. And so, whereas Proverbs is a very practical, everyday, you get up in the morning, this is where you're going to live. Ecclesiastes is more about life thought in general, like, developing a philosophy of life maybe. And I think what we find by our King Solomon, you'll find that here's a guy that his life philosophy, for much of it, man alive, is really kind of almost a bummer. And when you read it, you're thinking, this is a guy that God chose to use to do such profound things. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And we'll get into some of that, probably more so on Sunday. So I broke it down into some precepts here. And I'm only going to cover just 3 precepts right now. And I'm going to cover a few more on Sunday. So if you're listening to this, I hope you can make it here on Sunday to be able to hear the rest of this message. Let me start off, though, in the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 1 and verse 14, because this kind of sums it up a little bit. Ecclesiastes 1:14. I observed everything going on under the sun. Now, this is what Solomon is writing. And if you know about Solomon, you know that he was the wisest person that lived at the time, no doubt about it. Maybe that it's ever lived. I mean, he asked for wisdom. You know the famous story. Solomon could have asked for anything and everything, and yet he chose wisdom to lead God's people. And God said, surely, and plus on top of that, I'll give you everything else. Not a bad deal if you're Solomon. So he became fabulously wealthy and so forth. But he asked for wisdom. So clearly he has a lot of wisdom because of the things he puts forth here. He said, I observed everything going on under the sun. Now, you know that's hyperbole. That's not Solomon saying, I've observed everything that went on. That's not true. He's talking in general terms again. When we deal with philosophy, you speak usually in a generality, like the philosophy of life. It's not always specific to every detail, just so you understand. And he says, and really, it is all meaningless. Do you want Solomon at your next party? I mean, boy, he would keep the guests going, right? And it's all meaningless. It's like chasing the wind. Basically, it's vanity, all is vanity is what he's telling us there. So what's our first precept that we're going to talk about briefly here? Again, 3 of them. Precept 1 is this. Once you've tried everything, once you think you've exhausted this world's resources and so forth, you will find that genuine satisfaction, real, genuine satisfaction can only come from one place, and that's only found in God. There are many of you out there that are watching this, you've tried all kinds of things. And you'll say, even in using hyperbole. You'll say things like, I've tried everything, and you really haven't, but you've tried enough things to know that, man, I don't seem to find satisfaction in anything, until you finally have come to know the Lord is exactly what we're getting in. And so bringing that satisfaction into life. Now, many of you out there, people that are like this. You have friends right now that have tried and are trying all kinds of things. Maybe they're trading in a car because they want a better car. Maybe they traded in their job because they want a better job. Maybe they traded in a spouse because they think they're going to find a better spouse. They're always chasing after this fantasy that's in their head, this idea of satisfaction that's in their life. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you can't think of anyone because you're the person that's doing these things. So as much as you chase after pleasure and success and wealth, status, people are chasing after that. How about happiness or power? Any of these things. Some people are chasing after fame. We see people make fools of themselves all the time on TV as they try to sing better, do a particular talent better than someone else. And they're willing to expose themselves to all kinds of ridicule. Why? Because they just want to be famous. This is something they're chasing. This is something that they're desiring. And this is what leads us into these areas, only to find ourselves what? To walk away feeling empty and vain. We feel like, boy, that pursuit wasn't even worth it, and it left me completely unsatisfied. This is, if you think back into the late 60s, classic rock, of course, and Mick Jagger, when he would say, I can't get no satisfaction, he tried everything. He said, though I tried and I continue to try, I still can't get no satisfaction. That's the story of mankind, I believe, outside of God. They can't find where they're truly satisfied. Now, depends on what causes the dissatisfaction, right? Even Paul would say that I might know him. And you get the desire or the idea that Paul desires to know God deeper and more meaningful. Well, that's a good desire to have. That's a good desire to say, hey, I'd love to fill that. But when you're trying to fill it with the world stuff, you start to realize this is all temporary stuff. This isn't even going to last. That new car again, what happens to that new car? Well, rust, you get a little bit of mustard on a car seat, whatever, and you realize it's just not really worth it, right? Well, all these things that you label as temporary, Solomon even looks at it and says, it's all meaningless. It's all vapid. And he says, why even pursue these things? It says in Ecclesiastes 1:14 again, I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. They're all meaningless. Again, reminder, I want you to kind of get that in your head as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes. This is one of the general precepts that you and I should understand about life. It is a meaningless pursuit to pursue the things of this world. So what's the antidote? What are you saying, Gary? I should leave an aesthetic life and I should live on a mountain someplace and not pursue anything of this world? No, that's not what I'm saying to you. You see, if you get the priority of what you're seeking right first, there's nothing wrong with these other things, right? For instance, if we live in a world where it's okay to have a car. We live in a world where it's good to have a house. We live in a world where you can have clothing. But if you'll seek first the kingdom of God, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33, then all these other things, how you array yourself, how you get from one place to another, God takes care of all that for you. And so I would say to you, seek first the kingdom of God, and then he will add everything else. See, if Solomon would have found his satisfaction in seeking God's kingdom, but we know by his life that that's not what he did. And so anyway, first precept. Second precept, simply kind of an addendum or adding on to the first one, is simply this. All the stuff outside of God is meaningless. It's useless. All the stuff outside of God. So the first precept, just to remind you again, so you know what we're talking about here, was simply once you've tried all these things, you're going to find that satisfaction only comes from God. So the second precept is that Ecclesiastes paints for us is the second one, which is simply picking up where that first one leaves off. And that's anything that's apart from God is meaningless. It just doesn't matter. Ecclesiastes 2:10 and 11. Solomon writes this, anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. Now listen, everything that was in the world at the time, he could have laid his hands on. He could have indulged himself in. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. So, Solomon was wealthy. He had all the silver. He was the Warren Buffett, the Elon Musk of his day, is what he was. He had all the money, all the power, all the prestige you could possibly want. He had it all. He didn't have Tesla, but he had, chariots and all the rest of the stuff that he had there. But he realized that everything that he achieved in and of itself on his own was even worthless. What's he telling us? It's worthwhile to pursue relationship. Well, let's start with earthly relationship. If you're one of those people that think, well, I can just kind of do this on my own, you're going to find one day how dissatisfying it really is just to try to achieve for your own personal status, to grow in your own personal status. But you see, Solomon will let us in on a couple secrets here, and that is, I think, basically what he's saying is anything you're pursuing on your own outside of what God has blessed or preordained or has given to you is completely meaningless. So what's he saying to us? You need to have that relationship this way and this way. You need to be pursuing the things of God, but also pursuing the relationships that you have with people. For what? We were created for relationship. We were created to share in life experiences together. We weren't created, again, to live on a mountaintop out in the middle of the Midwest someplace and hate people and put up signs, do not trespass. We are to be in vulnerable relationships. Painful? Sure. But that makes it worth it, right? To risk. And to not risk, what do you end up with? A stoned heart is what you end up with. A heart that's thorny is what you end up with. If you keep reminding yourself, why am I doing this? The first thing you want to do is say, God, is this in your will? God, is this what you want from me? If you're trying to find like happiness in happy hour, if you're trying to find happiness in all these other pursuits on your own, making big money or big accomplishments, you're going to find when you get to the end of those things that they're not really going to fulfill you at all. They're just not going to do it. So I would say to you, the second precept that we learned there is whatever you're trying to pursue outside of God, without Him involved in it. Some of you say, I need to detach myself from God because God wouldn't be happy if I pursued these things. Well, then you shouldn't be pursuing them. That's the bottom line. In other words, God gives you the boundaries. God gives you the fence that you're to work within. And to make Him happy, you need to stay in that. Last one. And again, we're going to pick these up on Sunday. These precepts that we find here. These life lessons. This philosophy of life. What is my life mission statement and purpose? Well, the last one that we find here that Solomon certainly pursues is true wisdom is only found in God. You cannot have true wisdom outside of God. Now, we picked up this thought, back in the last book, back in Proverbs. Again, a Solomon-esque book. He lays it out there, and he picks up the theme here also. And we should desire wisdom, desperately desire wisdom. The problem is, where do we get it? How do we get it? And so forth is what it comes down. We look for wisdom, in life experiences, when we have those. We look for wisdom in the things that happen around us and what we perceive. But sometimes we still continue to make really poor decisions. Why? Because we don't let wisdom take root into our hearts. And the wisdom that we sometimes attain is what the scripture says, that's earthly wisdom, that's fleshly wisdom. I know some people that are very wise people when it comes to money and all these other things, but that's fleshly wisdom. That's not godly wisdom. You want wisdom that comes from above. And that only comes when you pursue relationship again with the Lord. Proverbs 1:7. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So deeply respecting God's power and authority was what it's all about. Now, as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes, you're going to find that Solomon wrestles with these issues to the point where he even questions the idea of God. All this is vanity. Pursuing any of this is just useless. And this is what he says until he gets to the end. And then he does a a turn of heart, as it were. I would imagine many of you, if you're watching this, you probably had those moments in your life where you even questioned God, the existence of God, why God, until one day all of a sudden it all just switched in your heart and your life, and you pursued Him, and you realized that the relationship with Him and the desire to know Him, there's nothing vain about that. That's the most fulfilling thing you can possibly have. So our life philosophy kind of starts where everything starts, and that is with knowing God. I certainly hope that you know the Lord. I certainly hope that you're not a religious person or a person who just kind of thinks, well, this Christian thing's pretty good. I like Jesus and I like this stuff. I hope that you have a committed, personal relationship with Him. And that only comes when you truly set your heart to believe in who He is and what He did for you. And that, of course, is dying on a cross and giving His life for you, that you, by believing and walking with Him, will have life everlasting. Guys, it doesn't come from reciting a prayer. It comes when you decide, I am going to believe and I'm going to trust, and my actions are going to follow that belief and that trust in who Jesus Christ is and what He said He would do. So, kind of getting into the philosophy end of things, because that's what this book is all about. It's a practical guideline for establishing sort of a mission statement purpose in your life. I hope that you glean something from it. I hope to see you on Sunday. God bless you.